Due to the current Rolex situation, the rising prices, the perceived decrease in availability and all that comes with it, I see a lot of debate happening online and offline too about, how Rolex is basically ruining the watch hobby, or more specifically, those people who buy Rolex are ruining it. And I started to think about the concept of, ruining a hobby. Is there a wrong way of enjoying watches? And if so, how does it look like exactly? And so I have divided this video into 3 acts discussing the entire topic of watch collecting, the watch hobby, and what it means to authentically enjoy something and what could potentially ruin it. I'm first going to start out with a, quick dive into the history of wristwatches in general. Then I will continue with a general discussion about hobbies. Then we are going to have a look at what it means to be authentic for Act 3. And last but not least, for my final act, I'll have a look at what it means to collect authentically and give you my very spicy hot take on why I think self-proclaimed watch enthusiasts hate on Rolex. And as a little disclaimer, this is just my take on this. It is a hypothesis, if you will, and I'll love it if you would give me your point of view after watching this video. So let's get started. Right, let's first get the history of watches out of the way, because I believe it really helps to understand where this hobby is coming from and how it developed over the past, centuries at this point, and where we're at today. It basically all started out with the first watches coming out of Europe in the 16th century, which evolved from portable spring-driven clocks. This transition time made for some really funny looking devices, which I will, put up on the screen, such as these clock watches from Peter Hinlein, for example. They were nicely decorated, ornamental timepieces to be worn on the body as an accessory. You could either fasten them to your clothes, you could wear them around your neck, or carry them in your handbag. It was mainly meant to be a piece of jewelry, an accessory, because these portable clock watches were horrible at keeping the time. So they were basically a classic 16th century flex for the nobility, but not the timekeeping tool that they are today. Anyways, time passes, and during the 17th century, men started to wear pocket watches, whereas women wore their watch as a pendant around the neck at the time, up until the 20th century. And so thanks to many major improvements to the concept of a portable watch, such as evening out the steep torque curve of the mainspring, the addition of the balance ring to the balance wheel, or the invention of the lever escapement, and many others, made it possible to wear watches on the wrist and to make timekeeping more precise. And a funny thing here, in the beginning, wristwatches, were almost exclusively worn by women, while men remained using their pocket watches until the early 20th century. And I quickly want to mention here that this emphasizes the accessory character of a watch at that time, for me, as it was, still something one would adorn themselves with and not a tool. I mean, wristwatches were called bracelets when marketed, so there's that. Anyway, so we are going to fast forward a bit again, and with the industrialization in Europe and the impact it had on modern warfare, unfortunately, wristwatches very quickly became a necessity for soldiers during World War I to synchronize maneuvers. For the first time, watches were mass produced, and perks like luminous materials were added to them to increase functionality and durability. And fitted to a leather strap, those watches could be worn around the wrist to, free the hands for combat. Previous to that, you also had watchmaker Louis Cartier, for example, who built a watch for his aviator friend Alberto Santos Dumont, so he could tell the time while flying around without having to fumble a watch out of his pocket. It was basically a little sneak peek into what was to come in terms of function for the wristwatch. Then along came many others, such as Rolex founder Hans Wilsdorf, for example, and introduced the first waterproof watch, and from then on the wristwatch really started to gain more and more in popularity. Soldiers came back from the war, and a wristwatch was now seen as a tool for the capable, heroic man, something no proper gentleman should be seen without. So yeah, during the 20th century, wristwatches and watchmakers started to really flourish. And it wasn't until the 1970s, though, that the traditional watch world was hit by its biggest crisis so far, also known as the quartz crisis. Though electronic watches existed way before the 70s, it was around that time that electronic watches could be produced in masses for an extremely affordable price, compared to mechanical watches. And it wasn't only the pricing, they were obviously way more accurate and, less delicate compared to their mechanical siblings. So obviously people went crazy for the new kid, aka the quartz watches. And the mechanical watch world truly struggled to survive. According to watchmaster.com, only 600 out of 1,600 watchmakers in Switzerland survived this time, which is incredible. The others simply, went out of business because they no longer keep up financially. But luckily, the mechanical watch world recovered a decade later and has been ascending ever since. Today, collecting and wearing watches has become more and more popular, and people can choose from a variety of watches that has never been this great. You've got quartz watches, you've got mechanical watches, you've got hybrids or smart watches. The watch community really has been growing, and there is no end in sight as far as I can tell. But as it is almost always the case whenever something gets popular, more popular, mainstream, all sorts of voices tend to arise claiming that the mainstream is ruining their beloved hobby that they once were able to enjoy in their comfy little bubble, that people aren't in it for the right reasons anymore, especially now that we have the Rolex, Patek, and lately also the Audemars Piguet situation, where watches are pretty much impossible to purchase at AD, so you would have to refer to the grey market, but be confronted with the extortionate pricing there. If you want to get an in-depth look into this whole mess, I wholeheartedly recommend Teddy's video on the topic, which I will link in the description box down below. Regardless, I want to circle back to the whole ruining the hobby situation, because with all the talk about Rolex prices, loving watches the right and wrong way, I wanted to understand where the sentiment of judging someone's participation in a hobby comes from. So let's get to the next part, to Act 2. So according to the dictionary, a hobby is described as an activity done regularly in one's leisure time for pleasure. Now we've got that down, let's have a look at the collecting hobby. And on that note, I want to add something, in my opinion, very important distinction one can make between being in the hobby for, the sake of watches in general, and being in the hobby to mainly collect watches. So basically, I would say someone can be considered a watch enthusiast without owning a single watch, simply by being, enthusiastic about watches. And then you have those who collect watches. Just something I wanted to add. So let's get to collecting. The hobby of collecting, according to Wikipedia, the mightiest of all the sources online, is defined as follows. The hobby of collecting includes seeking, locating, acquiring, organizing, cataloging, displaying, storing, and maintaining items that are of interest to an individual collector. According to scientists, collecting is one of the main characteristics of mankind, since collecting stuff has helped us, back in the day in those icy, freezing caves to survive during rough times when collecting and storing firewood, for example. And this trait continues as it bleeds through time in different variations. We are obviously still trying to simply survive and live and, thrive, obviously. And collecting is a big part of that. I would even argue that the latest very strong example is when collecting turned completely rogue, when people were hoarding toilet paper like there's no tomorrow in the early days of the pandemic. Anyways, it weren't and is obviously always the arguably vital items like toilet paper that are being collected or hoarded in some cases. But even during the Middle Ages, for example, people liked to collect non-essential items like art or books or jewelry and other things just to have or display. And as time went on, collecting something became not only something to do for fun or survival, but also something that helps to kind of represent your status to other people in your community, which is arguably also something necessary for survival in a more abstract sense. I mean, have a look at Lorenzo di Medici, part of the very powerful Florentine Medici family, who started collecting books, which then later became the Medici Library. He had his agents retrieve rare classics and also had a workshop where he had people copy these rare books, and you know, he loved just showing off his great collection, implying his status in society. Oh, and please note that I do not mean status in this very cliche, look at all the Porsche cars that I drive kind of way, but more broadly the type of social status that includes the level of respect, honor, assumed competence, etc., or more in general, the social value a person holds within society. Status in that context is obviously subjective and varies not only from community to community, but also geographically and all that. So we can agree that collecting, including the hobby of collecting non-essential items like stamps, seashells, and watches, is, or at least has been to this day, a way of not only satisfying this primal need for stuff, but also something to validate and or represent one's status within a community. And now that we know what constitutes a hobby and what it means to collect as a hobby, I want to get to the tough part, you know, the hot take of this video, if you will. Can enjoyment from a hobby or participation in a hobby ever be described as something inauthentic? Are people who are riding the Rolex train, the Rolex fanboys and girls, or the AP Royal Oak diehards not true watch lovers? And why do they get so much shit online, even though collecting for status is as natural as it comes? So authenticity is a concept that has always fascinated me. I even made it the main theme of my master thesis because I wanted to know what it really was and if it could ever be measured in a scientific way. And I am using authenticity here because I believe it is the closest thing to what people nowadays refer to as, you know, being true. I would even go as far and say that it's the same thing. And I think it really helps to understand the social phenomenon that is the Rolex hate train. So let's see if we can define authenticity first. And here I would like to start right away by adding perceived to the concept of authenticity, because there is no one true definition of authenticity within the watch hobby, but I would say a multitude of perceived types of authenticity. According to some scholars, and I quote here, authenticity is about congruence between our deeper values and beliefs, so a true self, and our actions. When there is a lack of congruence, this leads to an emotional force that seeks reduction. This posits a scientifically elusive but recognizable concept, the notion that there is an authentic or true self from which the lack of congruence is being generated. So we can note that authenticity, or being authentic, is the state of something or someone, an individual, being or acting true to themselves or true to a norm that is perceived as the correct way by the majority of people within a group. So let me give you a few examples to help us understand it better. So I guess a butcher wouldn't be seen as authentic if he did not eat meat due to personal ethics. Or someone who collects super rare and expensive stamps wouldn't be called inauthentic in his hobby simply because they favor a certain type of collectible within a hobby, aka, you know, rare and expensive stamps. Therefore, someone wouldn't be called not a true watch enthusiast because they enjoy collecting Rolex watches because of their value performance on the grey market, right? Well, wrong, duh. It seems that there is scrutiny almost immediately over someone in a hobby, or more specifically, the hobby of collecting, as soon as one thing gets involved, and that is money. Can we say that as soon as money gets involved, authenticity is being diminished? Well, if it was that easy, I would not be making this video. So let me now get to the finale, to my very personal hot take about this entire situation. And I'm very curious to know what you think about this. So is money to blame for the constant flame and hate people get nowadays for posting yet another Rolex into a watch group on Facebook? Isn't it Rolex, but is it money and how it is being used that we should be blamed for it? I mean, I can pretty much guarantee that as soon as I or someone else, it doesn't really matter, posts a photo of their Rolex to a group on Facebook, you get the following 3 types of reactions. The first one is someone, you know, likes a photo and you get an appreciative thumbs up in comments or something along those lines, where someone says just nice. and that's it. The second one is you get the standard, "Oh my god, not another Rolex, you're so boring" type of reply. And then there's this, for type 3, this lengthy monologue from someone who starts out by saying how those dumb Rolex sheeples are so blinded by the flex culture and that there are a million other watch brands far better yet more affordable than Rolex out there who wouldn't dream of having you bend over backwards to merely touch a sports D model and all that stuff. And it's usually response type number 3 that gets a lot of encouragement and, you know, people chiming in to agree and further shit on OP for posting their Rolex. And now I have to say that I'm trying to be as impartial as possible on this, but it is public knowledge that I am a diehard Rolex fangirl, so yeah. Don't say I didn't tell you. So if I had to generalize the common feedback a current Rolex post gets or a Rolex video on my channel, for example, it would be that there is no way you are truly and authentically into watches if you enjoy Rolex or, God forbid, have a Rolex only collection, because their current pricing and availability situation is driven by profit hungry ADs, grey market dealers and collectors who are only in it for the money. And now if we combine all of that, you know, the collecting hobby, the perceived authenticity, and the hate on very specifically Rolex and their value development, I've come to a sort of hot takey conclusion, or more a hypothesis, so to say, that I want to share with you. Because I think Rolex, with its very special status within the watch sphere, is just a placeholder for the disdain people have when it comes to cheating. And here's what I mean by that. So collecting as a hobby is inherently a journey-like type of hobby. You start with an item and over time you collect more and more to form your collection. And the emphasis here is on over time. No pun intended. Collecting has this connotation of being, I don't know, for the lack of a better word, tedious, but in an enjoyable way. You know, the hunting down of items, the struggle that goes with it, albeit financially or emotionally, time-wise, or whatever. And now, what are the implications if someone owns a highly desirable watch like Rolex or a Patek or AP? They are, for the most part, really good customers at ADs, which equals, you know, wealthy, or at least able to spend quite a lot of money at an AD, or, you know, are well off enough to afford the incredible high prices on the grey market. Again, just the implication, which then means that those people have cheated their way to a desirable collectible item. Money in that case is a shortcut to a very popular collection. In a way, people feel like you have to deserve a certain milestone within your collection journey, and well, a large amount of money lets you skip the line and, you know, cheat your way up. Which is funny because given the very somber definition of collecting, it doesn't mention anything about what would exclude someone from being a collector. It seems that it's the watch community that has more or less agreed upon a certain set of unwritten rules as to what makes someone an authentic watch collector and what doesn't. And according to that, well, it seems like buying a Rolex isn't authentic anymore because it represents all that is wrong with the perceived unfairness of the watch collecting journey and its participants. Anyways, like I said, it's a hot take, and it was just something I was thinking about a lot in the past couple of weeks. All this debate about what does and what does not make someone a watch lover can sometimes be very entertaining, but also frustrating at times. You know, in my collection video, I got a lot of comments from people who praised me for not having an entire collection of only Rolex watches. And while I am really happy that people enjoy my watch collection, I have to wonder why I wouldn't be as cheered on if I only owned Rolex watches. Why would that make me less of a watch lover? You know, that's just something my overanalyzing and overthinking self was curious about. And so, to come back to the video title, for those who hate Rolex, I would like to invite you to perhaps think about exactly why you hate Rolex, considering the things I have just mentioned. Because I think that brands like Patek or Rolex or, you know, whatever, are just stand-ins for the overall unhappiness of how other people spend their money and how it impacts the authentic journey of collecting things. I mean, I'm obviously not trying to convince people otherwise. I think it is just, you know, fun to think about different standpoints from time to time, or just playing a bit of a devil's advocate here. Anyways, this is all I have for you today. I really hope you enjoyed this type of video, and if you did, I'd be super happy if you would give this video a thumbs up so I know that you like it. And if you want to see more videos of me, I recommend subscribing to my channel. I'll also link a couple of other cool videos in my description box to follow up for this video down below. So yeah, thanks again for watching, and if you want to see more, I'll probably see you in my next one. Bye!